All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight, presented by FanDuel here at The Volume. Happy Wednesday, everybody. I hope all of you guys are having an incredible week so far. We are going to hit on 4 additional teams today that we have not hit yet in this preseason. Last night, the Grizzlies and the Orlando Magic had a very interesting game because they left their starters in at the end and were actually trying to win. And the Orlando Magic looked really impressive. We're going to talk about Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner and Wendell Carter Jr. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Memphis Grizzlies and some stuff that I didn't like out of them in that game. And then on Sunday night, the Clippers and the Timberwolves played. I thought it was a good opportunity for us to see the Clippers within the context of this John Wall situation, trying to figure out whether or not he's going to start. We got to see John Wall be aggressive in that game in the context of playing alongside Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. So I thought that was very informative. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Volume's YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss any show announcements. That's also where I put NBA footage breakdowns, little clips, things along those lines. That's where you're going to see that stuff, so you want to follow me there. And then last but not least, if for whatever reason you guys miss one of these shows and you can't get back over to YouTube to finish them, you can find them wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. And on that note, let's talk some basketball. So, with the Timberwolves, I want to cover them more in depth later this week when Gobert actually plays. I targeted this game more for the purpose of seeing John Wall as well as Kawhi and Paul George. But I do think the Timberwolves are going to rely on Gobert probably more than any player on their roster this year, specifically because of how much he's going to have to clean up on the defensive end of the floor. They play against the Lakers tonight, and I would expect Gobert to play then. If he doesn't play tonight, then there's a game from last week where they played against the Lakers without their stars. We'll at least get to take a look at how they looked offensively and some things along those lines. But we're not going to spend too much time on the Timberwolves today. In this game, like I said, Gobert didn't play. Their perimeter defense was atrocious, as was their help defense. I was concerned about that coming into this season because they shipped off a lot of their best perimeter defenders. Jordan McLaughlin in particular, one of the guys that they talked about filling in kind of in that Patrick Beverley role, was getting absolutely barbecued, giving up a ton of straight line drives, really struggling, is just a little bit undersized and just doesn't have good instincts, doesn't move his feet super well. That was definitely concerning. Anthony Edwards in particular had some really nice isolation defense possessions against both Kawhi and Paul George that just kind of reveal what his ultimate ceiling is, which is this dominant, downhill power guard mixed with some legitimate wing defense in there. But it just was a whole lot of Clippers getting that initial dribble penetration and then no help on the backside. A lot of the Clippers were really hurting Minnesota in this game with slips. So, the Clippers are playing a lot of perimeter players for the most part, although Zubac gets in there, right? But what was happening in a lot of cases is because so many players on the Clippers can shoot so well off the dribble. Like if you go under a ball screen against almost anybody in their rotation, they're going to pull up off the dribble. And so as a result of that, they had to come really high out of their drop coverages. And they would just, identify, push the ball in transition, identify who had the big on them, run up to set the ball screen, and then immediately slip it. And they were consistently hitting that guy slipping to the basket. And there just was no resistance on the back line. So translation, some of that is just the predicament that the Clippers put you in with how skilled they are on the perimeter. But a lot of it is just like Rudy Gobert is going to have his work cut out for him. If these perimeter players can't at least put up a little bit more resistance at the point of attack, it's going to look a lot like the Utah Jazz over the course of the last couple of years. So that was definitely concerning. Early on in the game, Anthony Edwards was spending a lot of time trying to attack specifically Marcus Morris on switches. And early on, Morris was holding up pretty well, but then he started to finally just kind of rip through and use his speed and athleticism. As is to be expected, when Anthony Edwards got downhill, they got good stuff. D'Lo hit some shots. He had a nice dunk off of like a high post cut where he made a post entry and then just cut off of him and got it and ended up dunking on, I can't remember who it was he dunked on, somebody on the Clippers. But just in general, he struggled to get separation. I'm not the biggest D'Lo fan out there. I still think that when push comes to shove, this team, the eventual version of this team is going to involve him either being a sixth man or being shipped off somewhere in pursuit of a player that's a better fit for them. Again, we're going to dive deeper into the Timberwolves later on because I do want to spend a lot of time spending a lot of time talking about Gobert, but we're going to hopefully get a better sample of that tonight. against the Lakers. So looking at the Clippers, John Wall started in this game, and Reggie Jackson came off the bench. In their first preseason game where they played all these guys, which I believe was like a week ago this past Monday, in that game, Reggie Jackson started and John Wall came off the bench. And you could tell almost right away, John struggled kind of identifying when to be aggressive in that particular lineup. Today, with the starting group, he was super aggressive. We have not heard from Ty Lue whether or not he plans on starting one or the other. My expectation is that he starts Reggie and that he brings John Wall off the bench. And I think that makes the most sense. He's just going to have to get through to John that specifically with that bench group, that's when he can really turn it on and be aggressive. Because in this game, with the starting group, John was persistently trying to put his head down and get to the rim. And he was having a lot of success. Got to the foul line 9 times. He had some and ones. John Wall looked usable, more than usable. He looked like a downhill guard that is going to be able to apply rim pressure and that is absolutely going to bring a positive dynamic to this team. However, in that first shift, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, it was kind of difficult to see where they were trying to get their touches and where their flow was in that particular offensive group. So I think it just makes more sense. First of all, Reggie Jackson is an aggressive guard too. The difference is Reggie Jackson is a gunner from the three-point line. So he's just more natural off ball alongside those two. It makes more sense to me to start Reggie. He's a little bit more willing to play off ball. He's got experience playing alongside Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in a tertiary role. Let him kind of run that spot. Bring John Wall as your first sub, around the 6-minute mark of the first quarter, then have Reggie Jackson go to the bench, and you give John a better opportunity to be aggressive there. But again, he was getting to the rim. He was drawing fouls, drawing a lot of help defenders. There were a couple of crazy plays in this particular game where, like, he may or may not have gotten fouled, but, like, he's elevating to the rim, and bodies are just colliding in midair, and, like, 3 dudes would go to the ground, like John and 2 players from the Minnesota Timberwolves. And then in the ensuing chaos, they'd be pushed. Maybe they'd get a defensive rebound and push the other way, but maybe the Clippers would get an offensive rebound putback. The point being, he's like a wrecking ball just flying downhill. He's a lot bigger and stronger than he was earlier on in his career when he was more thin, wiry, and athletic. And it's just a really interesting dynamic on this team. The Clippers, one of the biggest downsides with the Clippers over the course of this era, this really disappointing Kawhi and Paul George era, has been their unwillingness to drive to the basket. Kawhi Leonard does it from time to time, but he likes to turn his back to the basket and operate out of the post a lot. Paul George, like last year, was one of his best years attacking the basket. He had 2.2 made restricted area attempts per game, which was a huge part of why it was a resurgent season from him. And I think in general, if you look back to the previous year in 2021 when he had his playoff run that kind of erased a lot of the stigma that surrounded him throughout his career, the genesis of that kind of redemption for Paul George was putting his head down and getting to the rim. That, at the end of the day, this is a drive and kick team, not a pull-up jump shooting team. That doesn't mean you can't take pull-up jump shots, and this team has a lot of guys who are good at taking and making pull-up jump shots. But at the end of the day, that's a lower quality shot that should be designed more to rescue possessions and or when a defense runs a really good 2v2 pick and roll coverage and you need to take that type of shot. That's one thing. But this team is at their best when they're at the rim and shooting catch and shoot threes. So getting another guy like John Wall in there who's very intentional about putting his head down and getting to the rim, I think that's going to be a positive dynamic for this team. I did not get to see enough of John Wall defensively, mainly because the Wolves just weren't really trying to get downhill. The guy that Anthony Edwards kept trying to attack on switches was Marcus Morris. D'Lo's just not much of a downhill player. This just wasn't the right game to get a good feel for John Wall in perimeter defense, sliding his feet and trying to contain quicker ball handlers. So I think I need to see a little bit more before I start making proclamations about how well he's going to fit, because if he struggles defensively, that's going to be an issue. But overall, kind of zooming out the John Wall thing, for what it was, which was a mid-level exception signing of a player coming off an Achilles tear who didn't play any basketball last year, there's a range of outcomes that could potentially happen there, and this is better than expected so far. I think Clippers fans should be excited about that, but there is a lot to learn still there, where he fits in the rotation, specifically either off the bench or starting, and how he works on the defensive end of the floor. Looking at Kawhi. So, there were some I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about the difference between being yourself and being your best self as a basketball player. Because I think all of you guys who listen to the show who play in some capacity or used to play in college or in high school are somewhat familiar with this concept, but people who don't play as much may not be. There's like a baseline of what you can do on a basketball court, like your ability to shoot, your ability to dribble, your kind of natural feel for the speed of the game, right? And there are stretches in your life when you're healthy and you're playing a lot and you feel like your best self. You feel explosive. You feel like when you rise up into jumpers, you're getting great lift. You feel like when you try to make a move to get around a defensive player, you feel like you have a physical advantage. When you're getting to the rim and contact is happening around you, you power through the contact and you finish at the rim. But then there are these stretches where maybe you're dealing with a nagging injury. This happens to me a lot when my wife fills up my social calendar, or when we end up going on vacation, out of town for a week or two here or there. Like where you come back and it's like you still could shoot, you still have your handle, but like your body's just not right. Like you're not moving as well as you normally do. You're not getting the right amount of lift on shots. You're kind of like losing those contact battles around the rim. And that is like a very frustrating phase to be in as a basketball player, because that there's this better version of you that's there, but it's going to take a few weeks to get there, and that can get frustrating. And it's just kind of like the natural ebb and flow of being at your peak physically versus being somewhere beneath that. And when you watch an NBA player who's in that phase, in the lower phase, in the phase where he's not quite where he's supposed to be, it's easy to think like, oh, that's Kawhi. He's healthy. He's out there playing. Or, Steph in the 2016 finals, or LeBron in the 2015 finals when he had his back injury. You can look at it and be like, that looks like that player. But deep down, they know that that's not their best version of themselves. And that's kind of the vibe that I was picking up from Kawhi in this game. Like, Kawhi's back. He's playing. He's still big and strong. And he still can knock down a turnaround fadeaway and can knock down a pull-up jumper going to his left or going to his right. But he just doesn't quite have the burst that he had in that 2021 playoff run when he really had it going. And there were still some highlights in there, right? Like he had a play in the second quarter where he was running a pick and roll on the right side of the floor, and he split the pick and roll and he dunked it. But it wasn't the same as when he like absolutely obliterated, I can't remember who it was, on the Utah Jazz in that 2021 playoff run, dunking in his face, where there's just like a ferociousness to it that wasn't there on this dunk, where he's kind of just extending his arm and putting the ball in the basket. Like, it's still a highlight. It's still Kawhi, but it's not the best version of himself. He made a mid-range fadeaway on the left elbow. He made a pull-up jumper softly off the rim going to his left, driving to the basket once in a pick-and-roll situation. Like, he's making shots. He's Kawhi, but there's just not quite that same burst. And, the reality is there's some combination of factors at play here. It's some amount of, chronic, degenerative knee stuff. And then some amount of that natural, like I was been talking about with all the teams, that natural preseason training camp breaking through the physical wall thing. There's a little bit of both of that happening there. The question is how much. How much of it is the knee, which will not get better, and how much of it is the conditioning, which absolutely will get better. And that will end up being the biggest swing factor for the Clippers in this season. Because if he can get his legs underneath him and look like the old Kawhi at some point, they're going to be fine, because that dude's one of the top 6 players in the NBA. But if he's, somewhat compromised physically, then he turns into a guy that can attack some mismatches and knock down some shots, and he can play some solid defense, but that's not a top 10 player if he can't move his feet and he doesn't have that burst that he usually has. So it's going to be a really, really interesting thing to track with him. But man, it was glaring on tape. Left a lot of jumpers short in that game, which is always a telltale sign of a player who doesn't have his legs underneath him. Paul George more or less looked like PG in this game. He just didn't shoot well. One of the thing I wanted to point out with the Clippers before we move on to the next game, overall slow-footedness. And this kind of goes for both teams, by the way. There were some moments in this game where you're watching them run up and down the floor and you're like, man, these teams are slow. Because first of all, they started Zubac, and he's not overly fast, right? And then you go over to Minnesota, and Karl Towns isn't overly fast. D'Angelo Russell isn't overly fast. Like, they just kind of looked a little bit slow. And a big part of it is the Clippers. You know, it's funny because, myself included, we've talked a lot about how many wings they have. And they do have a ton of wings, make no mistake. But a lot of their wings are wings in size, but not wings in quickness. They've got some older guys that are aging that don't move super well, like Marcus Morris, a good wing. Played really well, good versatile offensive game from him in this game. But he's just a little bit slow-footed. And when Anthony Edwards really tried to get around him, he couldn't stop him. Nick Batum, really solid role player in this league, a good, smart wing. Starting to get a little slow. Robert Covington, had some plays in this game, cutting to the basket, making plays in passing lanes, just a little bit slow. And then when you factor in Kawhi and John Wall coming in off of these significant injuries, it's going to be matchup dependent, but it'd be really interesting to see if they ran into a team like the Golden State Warriors in a Western Conference Finals series. They're going to have a size advantage on the perimeter, but the Warriors are going to have a big quickness and foot speed advantage. So it's just something to keep an eye on. There is no perfect team in this league right now. All the teams have glaring flaws, even the teams on the top. But it's just something to keep an eye on with the Clippers. All right, moving on to the Grizzlies and the Magic. So I want to start with the Magic here because I turned on this game because I wanted to see Ja Morant and how his progression is defensively and just in general how the Grizzlies look in terms of their sharpness on the defensive end of the floor and in the habits and stuff like that. But I ended up being kind of taken aback by, one, how talented the Magic are, two, how organized and well coached they are. We need to take some time to shout out Jamal Mosley here because this team looked organized on offense. They were running a ton of stuff out of horns, which is like the perfect set to run when you have two really good post players, and in this case, or two really good forwards, I should say. And in this case, you got Wendell Carter Jr. and Paolo Banchero. Both of them are huge. Wendell is a really solid defensive player who's got vertical spacing. He knocked down a three in this game, at least 1 3 in this game. And then Paolo Banchero is just a walking mismatch creator at 6'10" and as big and strong as he is. And they were running a lot of stuff out of horns to get their best players in the right spots. They had a really interesting action to start the game. That was a kind of a cross screen action in horns that flowed into a double high ball screen, and Wendell Carter Jr. just slipped it while Paolo popped. Like we always talk about that double pick and roll. Someone slips, someone pops, but you don't know who it is. They both can shoot. They both can dive to the rim. Who's it going to be? Well, Wendell slipped it. And he was actually the first screen in the action, and he was wide open and ended up throwing down a dunk. And just in general, they were running actions on a lot of their possessions down the floor, which is uncommon in the NBA. They were working with smart stuff to get Paolo an advantage, either curling around screens or to get him switched onto smaller defensive players. They were just really well organized. They even ran a 2-2-1 full court zone press for large portions of this game, which is almost unheard of at the NBA level. And it was just a really smart little wrinkle from Jamal Mosley, because what it ended up doing was it turned a lot of Memphis's possessions into late clock possessions before they even got across half court. Like, they swing the ball back and forth and methodically work their way up against the press. All of a sudden, there's 11 seconds on the shot clock, and Ja Morant's got the ball at the top of the key. You can't really run anything. It's like, go create a shot. You better beat someone off the dribble. And that was kind of an interesting dynamic. Now, I don't think you could ever run that extensively over the course of the season, because I think eventually teams would figure out how to beat your press for dunks. So that's the one thing to keep an eye on. But I like the effort. And who knows, maybe it ends up being something that they can lean on for large portions of the season. But I did want to take a second to shout out Jamal Mosley. The other thing that kind of just popped off the screen was just the talent on this roster. Franz Wagner, we're going to talk about here in a little bit, just a do-everything big wing. Paolo Banchero, another do-everything big wing. Wendell Carter Jr. was super impressive this game on both ends of the floor, just flashes of jump shooting. Wendell Carter Jr. really, really took this game home at the end. Like I said, both teams left their starters in. Wendell in particular made every big play down the stretch of this game. And then obviously Franz Wagner made 2 plays at the end of the game. We're going to get to that in a minute. But Bol was out there looking like a good NBA basketball player. And then don't forget Jalen Suggs is on this team, although he's dealing with an injury right now. I believe the injury was less severe than they originally thought. So I think that's good news on that front. Hopefully he ends up coming back at some point in the season. Point is, this is a team that is really fascinating. And Terrence Ross, for the record, is just a really solid NBA 2-guard that can do a lot of stuff on both ends of the floor. Hit a really important pull-up jumper off of a curl at the end of this game. You obviously have Jonathan Isaac potentially coming back into the picture if he can ever get his ramp up going. This team has a ton of talent. And so I know it's been a long, boring stretch of Orlando Magic basketball, but they're going to be an interesting team and a good league pass watch this year. And for starters, they came out the gates in this game and just kind of beat Memphis's ass. They were up 23-9, I believe, at one point off of a trailing Wendell Carter Jr. 3 in the first quarter. And then it got close late in the game. John Conchar made a 3 to tie the game at 95. And then from there, it was the Wendell Carter Jr. and Franz Wagner show. So John Conchar makes a 3 to tie the game at 95. They go down the floor. They run one of their horn sets. And Wendell Carter Jr. just fakes a dribble handoff and whips around to his left and goes all the way to the rim. Xavier Tillman kind of lunges too far to hedge on the dribble handoff, and Wendell just takes him right to the basket for an and one. Recurring theme down the stretch of this game, Xavier Tillman really struggled defensively, jumping out of position way too easily, offering too much help, and Wendell Carter Jr. made him pay. And that's what you want from a big. Bigs are trained to think that they can help all over the place because typically bigs are unskilled offensively, so they can be roamers defensively. If your big can consistently make teams pay for not guarding him or for helping off of him, it just makes a lot of NBA defensive schemes struggle. So after he makes the free throw to put him up 3, Ja Morant gets switched on Wendell Carter Jr. and then tries to drive to the basket on him and doesn't even come close to making the layup because Wendell just smothers him with his size. Ja Morant had a really rough night in this game, in large part because Wendell Carter Jr. was bothering him at the rim, and then Ja Morant's jumper wasn't falling. And with these big super athletic guards, or these little super athletic guards, I should say, when their jumper fails them, teams can really sag back on them, and then a lot starts to fall apart for them. On the last play of the game, when Franz Wagner picked Ja Morant, a big part of why he picked him is he's able to continuously backpedal, and he knows Ja is going to drive because he doesn't have confidence in his shot. It just makes you one-dimensional. It makes you a lot easier to guard. So Magic had the ball up 3. Franz ended up traveling on a post-up. Desmond Bane ended up driving and making a layup on karl-Anthony. Also, karl-Anthony did not look great on either end of the floor in this game. But then on the next possession, Franz Wagner runs a pick and roll with Wendell Carter Jr., and Wendell slips it. Once again, Xavier Tillman on this play, like, wildly hedged out on to Franz's right hand, even though it was like 26 feet away from the basket, and he wasn't super aggressive shooting off the dribble in this game, although he did make a big one at the end. And Wendell Carter Jr. just slipped it. Franz hit him, and he made an easy little like 12-foot jump shot. Once again, Xavier Tillman was just all over the place in this game. But from there, Dylan Brooks ended up missing a 3, and then Terrence Ross got fouled on a 3. He made 2 out of 3 free throws to put them up 5. Ja ended up having a crazy out-of-control drive where he lost control of the basketball, but then just threw up some junk, and it went in. He got an and one, brought it back to 2. But on the last possession, the last sequence, Franz Wagner gets Brandon Clark on a switch, and he does that high hesitation with his right hand. And again, I always tell young basketball players, build your offensive set out of high hesitations because, 1, refs don't call carries anymore, and 2, it's the perfect bridge move that bridges all moves together. You can go from a high hesitation into an in and out, back into a high hesitation, into a through your legs, high hesitation, behind the back, high hesitation, or any combination to high hesitation. You could do it anywhere. And then most importantly, from a high hesitation, you can go up into a jump shot, or you can just push the ball in front of you and go to the basket. It's like the ultimate bridge move. So Franz has Brandon Clark on an ISO, does like a stutter step and goes into his high hesitation, and then just pulls the ball back. And when he pulls the ball back, Brandon Clark kind of takes a defensive slide step to the left, and now there's like 10 feet of separation. And Franz just sticks a cold-blooded three from the top of the key to put him up 5. And then, like I told you guys, Ja forces the action back down on the other end of the floor and immediately gets stripped by Franz. So a lot of talent on this team. They went out there and they whooped Memphis's ass in that game. They're going to be a fun team to watch in League Pass. I think that they're going to be a team that is up and coming over the course of the next few years. One last note on Paolo Banchero before we get out of here. First of all, he looks huge, which is not a big surprise. He looked huge when I went to go watch him in Summer League. The size thing is legitimately going to be a problem for teams. There was a really interesting play that Jamal Mosley ran, which I thought was smart. They cleared the right side for Paolo, and Paolo was in the corner. And then they had Karl-Anthony go and set a wide pin down on Paolo's man. Who's guarding Karl-Anthony? Ja Morant, right? So I can't remember who it was that was guarding Paolo, but they had to chase Paolo over the top of the screen, right? Well, who's helping? It's Ja Morant. The guy who's helping on the curl is Ja Morant. So Paolo's got his defender behind him, and he catches the ball, and he just powered right through Ja for an easy layup. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm like, that's such an easy, basic action that the Magic can run to get just about anything they want around the rim. Clear the side, put Paolo over there, have your smallest guard go set a wide pin down, have him curl around it. If the defender goes underneath the screen, he can pop and he can get wide open 10, 15 footers all game long. And if he chases him over the top of the screen, he's just going to power through Ja every single time. Actually, I think on that particular play, he ended up drawing a goaltending call as the defender tried to come over the top, which once again, when you're chasing over the top of the screen, you're already out of position. So it's just a really interesting dynamic that Paolo brings to this team. Another size related thing, there was a play where Santi Aldama tried to box him out underneath the basket, and Paolo just buried him under the rim, jumped over the top of him, grabbed an offensive rebound, and put it back in for an and one plus the foul. So he's a big dude who's skilled as hell from all spots on the floor, and he's just going to score the basketball easy for his entire NBA career. It's almost like a big power forward version of Carmelo Anthony, like a little bit bigger version of him. Not as quick, but bigger and has a little bit more of a power game. His handle looks smooth and confident, especially when he's given space by big defenders. He can get a little bit loose with it when it gets a little congested around him. And then he transitions from dribble to shot very smoothly, which is one of the most underrated skills in basketball, the ability to go into a shot from any spot on the floor. That's what's going to make him such a dynamic pull-up shooter over the years. And he just thrives in the physicality, doesn't shy away from it, inflicts his size on people. He's one of my favorite young players in the league. I still think I'm torn right now between whether or not I think Paolo's the best or Jaden Ivey's the best, because I'm so high on Jaden Ivey and his ability to get dribble penetration. But I think I lean Paolo right now as the best player in this class. All right, that is all I have for today, guys. As always, I sincerely appreciate your support. Later this week, we're going to hit on a couple other teams that we haven't hit on yet. We're also going to do a breakdown of the Redeem Team documentary, which I have not actually watched yet, but it's on my list to watch tomorrow morning. So we'll be covering that as well. As always, I sincerely appreciate your guys' support, and I will see you next time.